Why didn't Moses go into Canaan? Why wasn't Moses allowed to go into the promised land? Why was the Lord's punishment of Moses so seemingly harsh? Essentially what happens is that Moses in that passage comes to the end of his life. And a little bit like the end of Aaron's life that ended atop a mountain, a very kind of seemingly sad end to a glorious life. Moses similarly was told that he was going to die at the top of the mountain. And the Lord begins in verses 12 to 14 to repeat why Moses wasn't going to go with the Israelites into Canaan. Repeats the incident, if you remember, in the wilderness of Kadesh, and specifically at the waters of Meribah, where Moses had been told by the Lord to speak to the rock. The Israelites were grumbling about the need for water. And God spoke to him and said, speak to the rock and water will be provided. And Moses, if you remember, did something that was very similar to what God had said, but fundamentally not what God had said. He hit the rock with the staff. And at this moment of Moses' death, God reminds Moses of that. He doesn't soften it, he repeats it as if to put his finger on it. Moses doesn't respond to God in the way that I respond as the reader. It feels gutting that Moses had this moment, and yet Moses' response to the Lord, who was repeating the punishment, was that God would extend mercy for Israel once he'd gone. It was a pastoral care. Then verses 15 to 17, despite this Moses' expression of longing and care, not his own skin, the skin of the people, if I can put it like that, but then in verses 18 to 21, this is the key. The Lord gives Joshua as the answer to Moses' prayer for mercy and tells Moses to go and invest some of the authority that he had into Joshua. And that's the key. In verse 20, the Lord told Moses to invest Joshua with some of your authority that all of the congregation of Israel may obey, may be faithful, may be pure. And if you think of what Joshua went on to do in his life, the military campaigns, the strategy, the collapse of the walls of Jericho, the might, the wonder, the faithfulness, the boldness and courage that we know relates to Joshua, and yet he only had some of the authority that Moses had. And this is why Moses' decision or response and reaction to do something that was very similar to what God had said, but it wasn't exactly what God, that was tantamount to rebellion. And God says that to him in this passage we're looking at, Numbers 27, 12 to 23. God says explicitly to Moses, this is rebellion. You disobeyed the word of the Lord. You failed to uphold me as holy in the sight of Israel. That is the imperative. That's the specific burden and responsibility of leaders today who think that they can do something that's similar to what God has said, but in fact isn't what God had said at all. Satan masquerades as an angel of light, and when we do something that is similar to, but not actually what God has said, God doesn't pull the punch. He calls it what it is. It is rebellion. And this is why in the midst of considering the glory and the mercy and the grace of God, we must understand he is a holy God. He will not be mocked. His word is eternal. It is flawless. This is why we've written a confession of faith. We must clarify our doctrine.